This is the familiar image of Switzerland. Distant snow-capped peaks and alpine meadows framed by dark pines. But some parts of the country are famed more for their spectacular forests than for their views. The mountains of the Jura region are gentle and undulating, cloaked in dense forests of silver fir, pine and beech. The trees often grow at altitudes as high as 1,800 meters, and winters can be both harsh and long. It's common for snow to lie on the ground for over half the year. It's already March, but the snow is still falling in the forests, blanketing them in silence. Only one sound disturbs the stillness, the territorial calls of a bird that only feels at home in forests such as these. Most species of owl shun dense woodland as they find hunting hard in such close confines. But Tengmalm's owl is perfectly adapted to life deep in the pine forests of Europe, North America, Russia and China. The owl is named after the Swedish naturalist Peter Gustav Tengmalm, who first described it over 200 years ago. Only the male Tengmalm owl stays in the breeding area throughout the winter, guarding abandoned woodpecker holes. The females are nomadic and usually spend the winter months much lower down in the valleys where there's more food available. The male survives by storing prey in crevices and feeding on it when food is scarce. He does most of his hunting deep within the forest, occasionally venturing out along forest rides or clearings, but he always avoids tracts of open ground. He seldom leaves his chosen stretch of forest, as empty woodpecker holes are scarce and he must constantly defend his territory from other males. Once he finds a mate to occupy a nest hole, he will no longer need to guard the area. He surveys many possible nest sites, but will leave the final choice up to the female. Other animals have different reasons for investigating abandoned nest holes. The woodpecker made them well out of the reach of most predators, but the pine marten, a close relative of the weasel, is an agile climber. It's too early in the year for the nest to be occupied, but the pine marten does take eggs and chicks and can threaten the owls during the breeding season. Towards the end of April, the winter begins to loosen its grip on the mountains, and, almost imperceptibly at first, the thaw begins. At last, the sun begins to provide some warmth. Other birds, like the capercaillie, now begin to compete for territories and mates. The male's call echoes across the clearings. Even before it has melted, the first crocuses begin to force their way up through the snow. Gradually, the snow is replaced by a spreading carpet of flowers. Spring may come late in the Jura, but once it has, the transformation is remarkable. As the days grow longer, the character of the forest begins to change too. The beech trees are cloaked in the delicate green of fresh new leaves, and the pines begin to release their seeds, providing rich pickings for woodland mammals and birds. The male tengmalm spends most of the day roosting on a branch a few hundred meters from the nesting area. Like most owls, tengmalms are night hunters, able to locate their prey in the dark through acute hearing. Needle-sharp talons, hidden by feathers, and soft-edged plumage allow them to make a swift, silent kill. The male is still inspecting possible nest holes, unaware that he is being watched by another forest resident, the pygmy owl. The male has entered the territory of his smaller relative, and his presence is unwelcome. Camouflaged against a tree trunk, the male tengmalm waits for nightfall. After dark, he sets off to hunt for voles or dormice, which have just emerged from their winter hibernation. The mammals have no cover now that the snow has melted, and the male has no difficulty in catching a number of rodents in one night. He carefully stores each kill in one of the nest holes as a tempting gift to the female. The tengmalm is perfectly suited to hunting in dense forest, being smaller and more agile than many other species of owl. He continues to hunt until the floor of the nest is covered with offerings. At last, the male's display pays off, and he succeeds in attracting a female to one of the nests. Finding the hole to her liking, she accepts the male's offerings. Tengmalm's owls have become so dependent upon the original architect of their nest holes, the black woodpecker, that the two are almost inseparable. Both the male and female woodpecker excavate roost holes in sound beech trees by drilling out a round tunnel and then chiseling downwards and cutting out a spacious chamber. Usually it's the male that attracts the female into his hole during the breeding season. Sometimes they use the same hole year after year. The female has just laid 4 eggs. They take turns to incubate them, changing over every 3 hours or so. The great spotted woodpecker usually chooses rotten spruce or pine for its roost holes. It's smaller than the black woodpecker and makes correspondingly narrower holes. These serve as nest holes for pygmy owls. By mid-May, the female tengmalm is also incubating her own clutch of 5 eggs inside the nest chamber. During the next 27 days, she will rely on the store that the male has left in the hole as well as fresh food that he brings her. Despite this devotion on the part of the male, the pair only remain together for one breeding season. After performing her maternal duties, the female will depart for the warmer valleys again before the cold of winter sets in. By early June, there's plenty of food about. Caterpillars have emerged to feed on leaves and new shoots, and the forest is alive with the humming of insects, attracted to the flowers in the leaf canopy overhead. The race to feed hungry mouths during the short summer has already started for many birds. The black woodpecker young are now 3 weeks old and need both parents to keep them well supplied with ants and beetle larvae. The Tengmal owls are not far behind, for the first chick is beginning to hatch out inside the nest hole. It's an exhausting process, which can last for many hours. Owls lay their eggs at 2-day intervals, like most other birds of prey. This means that the first chick to emerge will be almost 10 days older than its youngest sibling. The weakest chicks seldom survive. Like the other forest birds, the Tengmal's owl rears its young around the same time that its main prey is also multiplying. Dormice mate soon after they emerge from winter hibernation in April. The female makes a snug nest well above ground, also often in a woodpecker hole. The first few days after birth, the young dormice are blind and naked. After 2 weeks, their first coat of fur will have grown. The female emerges at night to feed on fallen pine seeds and lick up moisture from the dew-covered moss. She's always aware that predators might be about. In the forest clearings, fresh new grass provides grazing for roe deer and chamois. The alpine flowers bloom quickly to ensure pollination before the cold winds of autumn send insects into a kind of hibernation. For now, though, there are plenty of insects for birds like the grey wagtail. While the female Tengmal broods her young, the male provides food for all the family. He calls in advance to let his mate know that he's approaching the nest with food. Only the female actually feeds the chicks in the nest. They're only a few days old, and their eyes are still closed. The female tears the prey to pieces and tenderly feeds slivers of meat to her young. After the first week, they'll be able to feed themselves. At this age, each chick eats an average of 1 dormouse every 24 hours. The male visits the nest about 6 times every night. As the first rays of sunlight penetrate the forest, a wild boar ambles off in search of roots and bulbs. Though a fortnight old by now, the young dormice are still helpless and extremely vulnerable to predators. This female senses danger and desperately runs to and fro with her young to move them to a safer location. Voles and dormice seem to be everyone's victims. A couple of kilometers away, the pygmy owls are bringing up their family. Every year, the female pygmy carefully balances the number of eggs she lays to match the food supply of mammals and birds. In this way, she can increase the chances of her chick's survival. Pygmy owls are one of the few owls to wait until her last egg is laid before starting to incubate. All the chicks are at the same stage of development. These ones are about 2 weeks old. Though they often hunt the same prey, pygmy owls avoid direct competition with Tengmalm's owl by hunting during the day. They have the poorest night vision of all the owls. The pygmy locates its prey by sight rather than sound. It carries its kill up onto a favorite branch. It regularly stores prey on the branch. The female can collect an item from there when she needs more food. Most owls don't clean out their nests, but the pygmy carefully removes pellets discarded by the chicks. Bones and other debris often give away the location of a pygmy's nest. During the brief summer, both the male and female Tengmalm owl hunt. Often they bring back more food than the chicks can eat. The female caches the surplus food in the nest hole. The larder serves as a buffer against a sudden shortage of prey. She's even careful to use the food in the order of storage. The chicks are now 3 weeks old and covered in chocolate brown down. They're now able to feed themselves, swallowing their food whole. Now that the female has left the nest, she no longer cleans it, and the chicks have to cope with an ever-growing mound of debris. Finally sated, they fall asleep. By early July, the pygmies are almost a month old. They're ready to leave the nest. Confined in their hole, they have no room to practice wing flaps. One bird stretches its cramped wings inside the close confines and begins to struggle out towards the open. Young pygmies are able to fly as soon as they leave the nest. Their parents will feed them for 3 more weeks, but as soon as the chicks are independent, they will drive their offspring out of their territory. Inside the Tengmalm nest, the 4-week-old owls are also only a few days away from fledging. They grow increasingly curious about their surroundings. Owls cannot move their eyes as we do. They have to turn their heads instead. Looking at their dark plumage, it's hard to imagine that these birds will ever resemble their parents. Now they're so impatient to feed that when an adult approaches the nest, they fight to climb up and take food from the entrance. The time has come to leave the nest hole. The oldest chick is the first to peer out at the dark forest, which will soon be its home. Tengmalms are also able to fly as soon as they leave the nest. The 2 younger chicks are still not quite ready to take the plunge. Although the eldest has fledged, it is not yet independent and still relies on its parents for food. The transfer can be quite tricky if you're not sure of your balance. As dawn breaks, the chick looks none the worse for having spent its first night outside the nest. Within the next few days, all of the chicks will leave the nest hole. Their parents will lead them a kilometer or so from the nest area and continue to feed them for 6 weeks. A year from now, the chicks will start their own families and begin to search for a woodpecker hole of their own.
Wild Europe next Monday at 8:30 visits Spain to investigate why the future of the rare black stork is in jeopardy.